wise men, and inferior, stepping on unforgiving women, stepping on hardship and abuse, world picture friendship, sleeping with sisters, building and seeds. An outline do capítulo 1. Samuel, viúvo solitário, vive isolado no rancho em terras áridas do Velho Oeste. Durante uma ronda, encontra uma mulher Apache gravemente ferida perto do riacho dentro de sua propriedade. Apesar do medo e tensões históricas, decide salvá-la, agindo movido por compaixão e esperança. Leva-a para dentro do rancho e começa a cuidar dos ferimentos. Gancho. Ao amanhecer, nota uma nuvem de poeira à distância. Guerreiros Apache cercam o rancho. Sua tarefa é estruturar esse capítulo usando o seguinte modelo de 7 pontos, garantindo máxima força dramática, linearidade e fidelidade aos eventos-chave. Um gancho poderoso e conciso nos primeiros 50, 70 palavras, abrindo com uma cena ou frase impactante que dramatize a solidão de Samuel e o inesperado encontro com a mulher Apache ferida. 2. Estabelecer rapidamente de forma evocativa o cenário árido e isolado do rancho, imprimindo o clima tenso de fronteira. Apresentar o personagem principal, Samuel, detalhando sua situação emocional e o dilema imediato ao encontrar uma figura Apache ferida em seu domínio. 4. Introduzir claramente o conflito central inicial, o gesto de misericórdia de salvar a mulher à custa do risco implícito frente à desconfiança mútua. Histórica. Desenvolver a tensão crescente e as primeiras interações entre Samuel e a mulher ferida, mostrando compaixão, cautela e esperança, preparando o terreno para o desfecho. Construir um único e forte ponto de virada, o descobrimento ao amanhecer de que guerreiros Apache cercam o rancho. Transmitir o choque e o peso dessa revelação, sem resolvê-la ainda. Finalizar o capítulo com uma chamada para ação, CTA clara e impactante para a inscrição, na mesma língua da história, conforme o modelo abaixo, imediatamente após o gancho, sem pedir likes ou comentários. Exemplo de CTA para ajustar ao contexto. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino ou algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso. Antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça, dê uma espiada rápida embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Instruções detalhadas de estilo e técnica. Inclua as seguintes orientações no prompt para garantir o tom e a qualidade. A. Intensidade emotiva evocativa. Faça a narrativa carregar emoções profundas e autênticas, despertando empatia e suspense. Retoma e cadência envolventes. Use ritmo dinâmico e linear, sem saltos temporais ou subtramas paralelas que desviem do foco. C. Descrição sensorial imersiva. Incorpore detalhes vívidos para a atmosfera, sons, cheiros, temperatura e sensações físicas do Velho Oeste. D. Sensação cinematográfica sutil. Crie cenas qualitativas que funcionem tanto na imaginação quanto em narração audiovisual. Atmosfera carregada de emoção e tensão. Reforce a apreensão e o medo mesclados com compaixão e esperança. Autêntico e plausível. Eventos e reações devem ser verossímeis, respeitando limites emocionais e culturais do capítulo restrito. Contraste entre força aparente, vulnerabilidade humana e sabedoria cultural. Samuel deve parecer forte, mas humano. E a mulher Apache, apesar da fragilidade, simbolizar força ancestral. Proibições estritas para o roteiro final. Não inclua etiquetas de cena, introduções externas, metadados, saudações, nem texto fora da narrativa fluida. O roteiro deve ser texto puro pronto para a narração. Instruções gerais adicionais. Idioma e narração. Texto deve estar em português brasileiro, narrado em terceira pessoa onisciente, com penetração dos sentimentos e percepções íntimas dos personagens principais. Formato do roteiro, texto fluido, organizado conforme a estrutura do episódio, limpo para gravação direta, sem marcações técnicas ou visuais. Use esse prompt de conduzir a escrita do capítulo 1, focado em imersão, clareza narrativa e envolvimento emocional imediato, alinhado integralmente com o outline fornecido. Checklist para validação interna antes de enviar o prompt. Não cobertura completa e estrita do outline capítulo 1. Estrutura clara em 7 pontos conforme solicitado. Inclusão da CTA final no idioma correto. Estilo ajustado conforme H. Texto limpo sem elementos extras. Sua resposta final deverá conter apenas o JSON com o array prompts e o objeto interno conforme especificado aqui. The dawn's pale light crept slowly over the horizon as Samuel stood by the weathered window of his modest ranch house. Outside, the vast arid plains stretched endlessly, their silence broken only by the soft rustle of dry sagebrush shaken by a cool morning breeze. His eyes narrowed as a slow-moving cloud of dust stirred on the distant trail. Too many riders to count. Inside, just a few feet away, Nayeli stirred softly on the cot he had fashioned from canvas and old blankets. Her dark hair tangled, face pale but determined even in sleep. Samuel's heart pounded, a heavy weight settling deep in his chest. The events of the last day replayed in his mind. The decision to carry that broken woman from the creek's edge into his home. Fear and anger, not entirely his own, had warred within him. A lifetime of hearing stories, warnings, and hatred simmered under that skin of his. And yet, he had helped her, mending wounds with rugged fingers, offering water and scarce food. He had seen raw human need beyond the tint of skin and old grudges. Now the dust cloud signaled a gathering unlike any he'd hoped to avoid. The Apache warriors had come. The ancient echoes of conflict and mistrust throbbed like a drumbeat in the air between them. Inside the dim light of the cabin, Nayeli's eyes fluttered open. The fragility of her condition, a harsh testament to battles Samuel could barely imagine, struck him anew. But even in weakness, she radiated a quiet strength shaped by endurance and unspoken pain. Their gazes met, and an uneasy tension, thick and unyielding, filled the room. He, the protector, who might unwittingly doom them both. She, the wounded stranger, whose fate hung in the balance of ancient loyalties. A sudden, slow knock broke the strained silence. Samuel approached the door, muscles tense beneath a rough spun shirt. Pulling it open cautiously, he was met by the steady gaze of a lone figure, framed by the dusty morning light. The man carried no weapon, but his presence spoke volumes. a messenger of the warriors waiting beyond, bearing words from a tribe of shadows and storms. With deliberate calm, the visitor spoke in halting English, softened by the cadence of Apache tongue. He identified himself as Tayan, sent by the warbands surrounding the ranch. The message was clear, but layered with unspoken threats. Nayeli was theirs, and her rescue by the outsider was a breach of tribal law and honor. Samuel listened, the words sinking like stones into his gut, each syllable a test of his resolve. Inside, Nayeli's lips parted as she spoke softly in her native tongue, her voice trembling at first, but gathering strength. She explained, through fragile phrases and gestures, that she had fled from a bloody conflict, a brutal feud within her own people. The faction pursuing her sought not just to reclaim, but to punish. Her presence at the ranch was more than a question of survival. It was a spark igniting old fires. Samuel's eyes darkened with the weight of this revelation. The narrow trails of memory twisted back to his late wife, a woman whose gentle spirit had often clashed with the harsh realities of these lands. This moment, this unwilling partnership with Nayeli, stirred something buried deep inside him, a fierce need to protect life beneath any banner. Tayan's expression hardened as he relayed the growing impatience of the encircling warriors. His gaze flicked toward the windows, toward Nayeli's fragile form, then back to Samuel with an unmistakable warning. Mercy shown to this woman could mark Samuel as a traitor, a defiler of trust between the Apache and the settlers. The ranch's walls, solid and worn, seemed suddenly fragile against the weight of history pressing in. Samuel stepped back, hands clenched by his sides. Words tangled in his throat. He knew that yielding Nayeli to the warriors meant condemning her to a fate he could not bear to imagine. Yet defiance might bring fire and blood to his doorstep, putting not only Nayeli, but himself and the homestead at risk. Nayeli's eyes met his again, searching, fierce in their vulnerability. Despite the silence between spoken tongues, an unspoken question radiated through the small room. Could trust be found amid the threat of war? Outside, the leather boots of warriors struck the dry earth like thunder. The murmurs rose, chants from a past unhealed, a people bound by honor and fury. Samuel swallowed the trembling knot in his throat, feeling caught between two worlds, torn by time and violence. As shadows lengthened, the messenger turned back to his riders, carrying with him Samuel's reluctant awareness. This moment was no longer just about compassion, but about survival amid the harsh truths of the frontier. The thin veil separating life and death, ally and enemy, had been drawn tight. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the silent threat encircled the ranchstead like a living thing, watchful, waiting, ready to seal the fate of all within its grasp. The question that hung heavy in the air, unsaid but understood, was clear. What price would be paid for mercy in this merciless land? And behind the whispering winds, Nayeli finally uttered a single word, one that held the fragile hope and crippling peril of their intertwined destinies. Just as the first arrows were nocked, and eyes sharpened for the choice that would come with the gathering storm. Samuel strained his eyes against the morning sun, measuring the cloud of dust that rippled across the parched earth. The distant stir of hooves echoed faintly, growing louder with each breath of the dry wind. Beyond the fragile walls of his ranch, the silhouettes of Apache warriors emerged, circling like ghosts summoned by ancient ghosts of vengeance and honor. The weight of that sight pressed down upon him, a silence thick with history and unspoken threats. Inside the cabin, Nayeli's eyes flickered open, trembling beneath heavy lids. Her breathing was shallow, yet steady, the fight obvious in her dark gaze, despite the exhaustion that clouded her features. She watched Samuel with a mixture of gratitude and guarded suspicion, knowing the precarious line they walked. Her wounds throbbed, each pulse a reminder of the blood spilled behind her flight. A flight not just from enemies, but from her own. Tribe's betrayal. The tense quiet was ruptured by a tentative knock on the rough wooden door. Samuel's hand hovered near the knob, steady but wary. Slowly, he opened it to reveal a single figure silhouetted against the harsh light. A messenger armored in simple leathers, his face solemn beneath a tangle of sun-streaked hair. Without haste, the man knelt briefly in respect before speaking in laced English, words carrying the stern cadence of his people's tongue. "I am Tayan." The warriors outside, they wait for the woman. His eyes bore into Samuel's with impatience edged in steel. She is their blood, but she fled from the fire inside. The tribe demands her return. Your mercy is seen as betrayal. Samuel swallowed hard, the dry lump in his throat, refusing to yield. He studied the messenger's face, unyielding, loaded with the weight of his duty and warnings. The law of the tribe was not a suggestion. It was etched deep in the fabric of their survival. And yet the presence of a rescued woman, lying fragile on his cot, ignited something fierce within Samuel. A stubborn defiance, born of loss and memory. Nayeli's voice broke the space between them, fragile but urgent. In halting passages of Apache, mingled with rough English, she whispered what little she dared reveal. A brutal fissure had torn through her people. A faction, driven by fury and thirst for power, had turned against her. This was more than a simple chase. It was a vendetta, cloaked in blood and old grudge, one that saw Nayeli as a traitor to their cause. Samuel felt his mind reel back to shadows of his own past, the gentle laughter of his late wife, the soft warmth of a hand he would never hold again. In this mirrored pain, he found a new resolve, to shelter life without question of race or past wounds. Yet the truth pressed mercilessly on his thoughts. In harboring Nayeli, he had stepped into a firestorm far bigger than himself. Tayan's gaze hardened, an unspoken warning in the set of his jaw. The warriors are restless. Their patience thins like the desert water. They demand a choice: deliver the woman or prepare for war. The ranch will be burned. No man or woman will stand in their path. The words crashed around Samuel's heart like thunder. To give her up was unthinkable. To defy them was to invite annihilation. His fists clenched, powerless at his sides, the cabin suddenly feeling as fragile as a spider's web in a storm. Nayeli met his gaze, fierce, defiant despite her wounds. Her silent question echoing between them. Could trust be forged here, in the shadow of impending violence? Outside, the dust swirled as warriors shifted restlessly, their murmurs weaving an ancient chorus of vengeance and honor. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, the horizon blurred by the tension rising like heat waves from cracked soil. Samuel's heartbeat synced with the gathering storm, a fragile calm before the inevitable clash. Minutes stretched thin. Then Tyon spoke once more, his voice low and grave. "You have time, but little. Decide, or the living and the dead will answer for your choice." Samuel turned away from the door, eyes settling on Nayeli's pale form. In that moment, all the fears and hopes tangled inside him converged. The promise to protect this life, the threat looming beyond the walls, the fragile thread between mercy and survival. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the barren land. And as wind carried the distant war cries like a sinister hymn, one of the warriors stepped forward from the encircling band, a young man whose eyes burned with aggression and impatience. His voice cut through the heavy air, sharp and commanding. "Enough waiting. Give us the woman now, or we bring fire to this place." Samuel's breath caught, heart pounding fiercely. The fragile peace held by words was crumbling like brittle earth beneath the pounding hoofbeats of anger. In that unbearable moment, the fate of the man and the Apache woman teetered on the edge of a blade, ready to tip toward war or shattered hope. With the weight of history pressing on his soul and the silent plea of the woman before him, Samuel stood still in the widening shadow of an impossible choice. The storm had come, and the ranch, their refuge, was caught at its cruel heart. Samuel's breath caught in the chill of early night, moments after the messenger Tyon had disappeared back into the shadows where warriors hovered like ghosts. The fragile quiet inside the ranch house hung heavy, broken only by the soft crackling of a dying fire and Nayeli's faint, uneven breathing. Her dark eyes, sharp beneath swollen lids, searched Samuel's sun-lined face, holding questions and fears neither dared voice aloud. He knelt beside her cot, fingertips brushing away the damp strands of hair clinging to her sweat-slicked forehead. "You speak of old fires," he murmured, the weight of his words hanging between them. "These wounds go deeper than the bark of the trees outside." Nayeli's voice was barely a whisper. "Not all Apache share the same path," she said in strained English, each word measured. "Some seek peace, others blood." Her fingers clenched the thin blanket tighter. Samuel absorbed the truth, the grains of a fractured world, settling heavier than the dry dust outside. He had heard stories whispered among settlers, tales of tribal rage beyond the hunting grounds and dusty trails, but never understood the fractures within until now. Compassion, he realized, was a fragile thing here, twisted among ancient debts and broken promises. He straightened, pacing the small room, muscles taut as drawn bowstrings. The encircling warriors knew of Nayeli's departure from the faction that sought her life. Their purpose was not just reclaiming a fugitive, but exacting punishment, a vendetta scarred by pride and blood. Samuel's heart hammered defiance, yet logic warned him of the powder keg, pressing cold against the thin walls. Outside, the night air carried low murmurs, the measured steps and restless shuffles of a growing warband. Samuel imagined their shadows flickering against the adobe walls, like living flames licking the edges of his fragile hope. After a long moment, Nayeli's gaze found his again. "You ask me why I fled," she said slowly, the pain in her voice as raw as the scars hidden beneath her tattered clothes. "My people, not all wish for peace. Some are lost to hate and vengeance. I could not stand with them." Her dark eyes flickered with a flicker of something like regret, or perhaps mourning, for what she had left behind. Samuel's jaw clenched as he searched her face, seeing not just a stranger, but a mirror of survival and loss. His wife, once full of dreams and light, had succumbed to the cruel frontier's silent grip. And now here was Nayeli, a warrior broken not only by arrows, but by the fracturing soul of her people. Gathering the remnants of courage, he said, "I will find a way to send word. If there is a chief who can hew reason, one who desires peace, we must speak. This bloodshed, it cannot be the only answer." Nayeli nodded, though a shadow crossed her face. "The peace you seek is fragile, outsider. It is held together by those willing to listen, yes, but the radicals, they will not listen." Her hand trembled as it slid from beneath the blanket, revealing a faint scar etched into her wrist, a mark of allegiance severed by force and will. Samuel recognized the weight of her scars, the invisible lines drawn sharper than any bullet. He knew negotiation was a dangerous path, but the alternative was fire and ruin, and the death of both their fragile hopes. He moved to the small window, gazing out into the darkening landscape. The surrounding warriors were no longer distant shadows, but living sentinels circling his homestead. A standoff carved into the earth. Minutes stretched thin as he weighed the peril he had invited upon himself and this woman who had become a symbol of fragile trust. Samuel's mind flickered over memories of quiet evenings with his late wife, her laughter and kindness illuminating the barren land. Now, that light was flickering anew in this uncertain alliance, a fragile ember against the darkness threatening to consume them all. Suddenly, from the perimeter where the warriors waited, uneven rustling and shifting disturbed the tense stillness. Samuel's gaze snapped sharply toward the sound. Movement, slow, deliberate, yet ominous, traced the edges of his vision beyond the fire's glow. A figure slipped past the watchful eyes of the others, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably a scout from the warband. Samuel's pulse quickened. The presence of an unseen threat was more unnerving than the overt siege. He stepped away from the window, every muscle taut with anticipation and dread. The night seemed to close in, tightening like a noose around the small ranch that had, until yesterday, been his world of solitude. Inside, Nayeli's breathing hitched at the sudden shift in tension, and she met his eyes with a new urgency. "They are closer," she warned softly. "Not just outside, but within." Her gaze flicked toward the door, then back, the unspoken warning clear. Samuel understood then. The danger surrounding them was not a single threat, but a multitude, woven from old hatred and suspicion. Their sanctuary was fragile. The line between protector and prisoner thinner than ever. He squared his shoulders, the worn lines of his face hardening with resolve. "Then we stay ready for whatever comes in the night." His voice was low but steady, a promise, a challenge, a desperate hope. Outside, the quiet, cracked with whispered commands and restless movement. The warriors held their vigil, enclosing the ranch like a tightening noose, while inside, two souls, forever changed by circumstance, stood on the brink of an unseen storm. The ranch no longer belonged to just Samuel. It had become a battleground for peace and war, mercy and vengeance. And beneath the silent stars, in the deep dark of the desert night, the gathering storm waited, close, patient, and inevitable. Tonight, the fragile thread of humanity would be tested as never before. The tension in the air was palpable as the emissary, Tayan, stood firm beneath the blistering sun, his austere face carved by years marked with loyalty and hardship. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, cut through the heavy silence inside Samuel's humble ranch house. The circle of Apache warriors awaited beyond the weathered wooden walls, their presence a grim reminder of the fragile thread upon which this fragile peace balanced. Samuel met Tayan's gaze steadily, muscles taut but voice calm. "I have done no wrong. Nayeli was wounded. I saved her life." Tayan's lips tightened into a thin line. "Saving her is not what troubles the council." He swept a hand toward the horizon, where the red earth met a darkening sky. "It is what your kindness implies, alliance where there is none, a betrayal to the old ways." Samuel felt the weight of that accusation settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat soaked in rain. The frontier was no stranger to brutality, but it had also taught him the rare and precious worth of mercy, even when the cost might be his own undoing. Nayeli lay propped weakly against a rough pillow, her dark eyes flickering with fire, even through the haze of pain. She had come to represent more than a broken woman in need of care. She was a defiant symbol of hope and a lightning rod for conflict. Stepping forward, Nayeli's voice, firm despite lingering weakness, cut through the thickening air. "Samuel risks all for me, not out of folly, but because he sees me as a person, not a prize or enemy." She looked at Tayan directly, her words laced with quiet courage. "There are those in our tribe who remember mercy, who understand that life, no matter the color of its bearer, can be honored." Tayan's gaze flicked to her, as if registering a new, unwelcome fact. "Words can be drowned by blood," he replied, voice grave. "The radicals would see your mercy as a knife in their backs. They will not yield." Samuel's chest tightened. He recognized the hard truth simmering beneath Tayan's words. The war raging within the Apache heart was as fierce as any conflict with settlers, a battle of ideals as much as blade and bullet. "Then perhaps our survival depends on finding those who still listen," Samuel said slowly, pushing back memories of his late wife, her gentle eyes urging him toward hope. "If the council is divided, if there are those who seek peace, they must be found." Tayan's eyes narrowed in suspicion, but he did not deny the possibility. "Messages will be sent," he answered, "but time is short. Factions grow restless. strength wanes for patience. Before Samuel could respond, a stir outside shattered the fragile calm. Through the thin walls came the muffled sounds of hooves pounding. Unevenly over dry earth, a shadow darkened the threshold, the unmistakable shape of armed colonists. Their approach an ominous crack in the already strained quiet. Samuel's breath tightened. His gaze shot toward the dim window. The colonist's silhouette contrasted starkly against the dust-choked horizon, steady and relentless as a coming storm. They carried arms with deadly intent, their eyes hard and suspicious, bringing with them the weight of misunderstanding and old resentments. Nayeli's hand found Samuel's wrist briefly, a silent tether amid the growing chaos. Her dark eyes, fierce and wary, met his in a glance that needed no words. Two fronts now loomed, the Apache warriors encircling the ranch, harboring a fierce claim on her life, and these armed men advancing across the wasteland, ready to ignite a conflict Samuel had desperately sought to avoid. Tayan's voice cut through the thickening tension once more. "We negotiate still, but the radicals strain the leash. They smell weakness." He shifted uneasily, casting a hard glance behind him at the vigil of warriors. If the colonists come bearing guns— Samuel swallowed the knot rising in his throat. The delicate balance was fracturing, threads unraveling into a tangled snarl of fear and aggression. Every choice between mercy and self-preservation seemed to build walls higher, encasing them in shadows of mistrust. "No war will save us," Nayeli whispered fiercely. "Only understanding." Her voice cracked, raw from pain, but undeniable in its truth. "If we stand divided, both will be lost." Samuel's gaze swept the dusty horizon where two forces pressed closer, each bound by ancient fears and new dangers. He felt the familiar sting of helplessness, weighed down not by his own wounds, but by the knowledge that the fight now would not be fought by guns alone, but by the fragile hope of shared humanity. The ranch, once a quiet refuge, had transformed under the relentless sun into a crucible, a place where loyalties would be tested and destinies forged in fire. Outside, the Apache warriors shifted uneasily. The colonists' patrol advanced with steady step. Between them stood Samuel and Nayeli, caught at the crossroads of survival and doom. The crack of a distant rifle blast shattered the silence, slicing through the stale air like a knife. Eyes snapped toward the sound, breaths quickened. The long-feared moment had arrived. Samuel gripped the edge of the worn table, heart hammering fiercely. The thin line between peace and chaos had been crossed. Two sides closing in, their fates intertwined. They were surrounded, trapped between the fierce spirits of the Apache and the unforgiving law of the frontier. And in that dreadful moment, the ranch sang its somber song, a beacon of mercy, caught in a storm of vengeance and war. The dusty wind swirled along the fence lines, carrying whispers from the warriors stationed beyond the dry expanse. The sun blazed high, casting stark shadows that stretched like silent sentinels across Samuel's ranch. Between the sturdy wooden walls, tension simmered like a heat haze, each heartbeat a reminder that war was no longer a distant threat, but an impending storm, eating away at the fragile calm. Samuel stood near the window, eyes tracing the restless figures of the Apache warriors circling the homestead. Their postures spoke of patience, thinning into something sharper, like coiled snakes awaiting the slightest provocation. Somewhere deeper, a war drum echoed in memory, a relentless summons to battle between ancient enmity and the hope he'd clung to fiercely since Nayeli's arrival. Inside, Nayeli's breathing grew heavier, her body still fragile, but her spirit unyielding as ever. She watched Samuel with a quiet intensity, the weight of her tribe's expectation pressing down alongside the heavy silence. The ranch no longer held just shelter. It had become the crucible on which survival and loyalty would be tested. Suddenly, the rumble of pounding hooves shattered the tenuous stillness. From the edge of the horizon, a mounted patrol of colonists emerged, their dust trails billowing swiftly toward the homestead. Their faces were hardened, eyes narrowed with suspicion and resolve, weapons glinting under the ruthless sun. They approached like an advancing thunderhead, promising chaos on both sides. Samuel's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into claws against the rough wood of the windowsill. He knew this was the moment when years of mistrust and pain could ignite into a blaze that consumed them all. The warriors outside exchanged terse signals, their sharp glances flickering toward the newcomers, the promise of violence crackling between their ranks. With deliberate urgency, Samuel turned to Nayeli. "You must speak to them," he urged, voice low but firm. "Only you can reach their hearts. Remind them what's at stake. If I stay silent, all of us will burn." Her dark eyes met his, stormy with pain and resolve. Though weakened, she leapt to her feet, every movement laced with the grace of her people, wounded but unbroken. Her voice rose, clear and fearless, carrying across the yard and beyond the walls. "I am not your enemy." Her words cut through the tension like a blade. "I am one who fled from bloodshed within my own tribe. This man saved my life, not for power, but for mercy." She stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of peace toward the encroaching colonists. The patrol's leader, a grim-faced man with sunburned skin and eyes like flint, barked orders to halt. Horses reined in, abruptly, kicking up clouds of dust. The warriors tightened their ring, weapons poised but not drawn, waiting. Samuel swallowed a dry lump, stepping into the space between the two forces. "This land has suffered enough," he called out, voice carrying with a strength born of desperation. "We stand here not as enemies, but as men and women caught in the shadow of old wars. Lay down your arms. Let words carry us further than bullets ever could." For a breath, the world hung suspended, breath held, eyes locked, the fate of all poised on a knife's edge. Nayeli's words had sparked a flicker of doubt among some colonists, the hard lines of their faces softening just a fraction. Yet on the edges, crackling with impatience, tension surged like a live wire. Samuel's gaze shifted back to the Apache warriors, their faces a mixture of fury and doubt. Among them, a young warrior stepped forward, his anger barely restrained. "Enough talk!" The wild fire in his eyes mirrored the dry heat of the desert sun. "She is ours by law and blood. Give her or we burn all this to ashes." The colonists tensed, fingers tightening around rifle stocks. A voice from their ranks echoed back, fierce and unforgiving. "No more hiding. If she's here, she answers to the law of the settlers." The threat hung heavy, laying bare the peril closing in on every side. Samuel's breath hitched. The delicate balance teetered, the walls that held back the storm beginning to crumble. He faced Nayeli, their mutual understanding. Unspoken but unwavering. They were trapped in a powder keg where mercy was the fuse. His voice dropped to a whisper, laden with urgency and hope. "You are the bridge. Only you can stop the fire before it consumes us all." Their eyes locked, and the distant crack of a rifle shattered the fragile silence. A single shot fired into the blistering air. The echo rippled like thunder, announcing what all feared, but none dared speak aloud. The encircled ranch became a crucible where centuries of pain and mistrust fought with the fragile flame of compassion. And the war, once a quiet threat cast in shadows, had finally bled into the unforgiving light of day. The first shot had sounded, its reverberation a grim command. The battle was about to begin. Dust and tension mingled in the burning midday air, wrapping the ranch like an invisible noose tightening around Samuel's neck. The circle of Apache warriors pressed closer, their silent presence punctuated by occasional, wary glances exchanged between men and women, etched by years of survival and unspoken history. The stoic patience in their eyes crackled beneath, threatening to ignite. Inside the wooden walls, Nayeli shifted with a quiet strength. Wincing as she adjusted her position, her dark eyes scanned the ranch's perimeter through the single window, muscles taut despite her fragile frame. Every breath she took was a testament to enduring pain and an indomitable will to protect what little sanctuary remained. Samuel stood beside her, the weight of the encirclement threatening to crush what fragile hope they had cultivated. His weather-beaten face was drawn tight with worry, his hands gripping the splintered windowsill like a lifeline to the world outside, a world now fractured between trust and war. Suddenly, a sound shattered the heavy silence. The rhythmic pounding of hooves echoed sharp against the cracked earth. The distant dust cloud grew swiftly, churning like a brewing tempest, moving toward the homestead. Samuel's pulse quickened as the unmistakable forms of mounted colonists appeared over the horizon, their faces grim and resolute beneath wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung ready. Fear and determination rippled through the circle of warriors. Their movements shifted from measured calm to sharp signals, eyes narrowing like coiling serpents. The delicate balance, kept by words and wounded pride, began to unravel as two hostile forces closed in, one from the desert's edge, the other from the shadows encircling the ranch. Samuel met Nayeli's steady gaze, a silent resolve passing between them. "It falls to you," he murmured, voice low but urgent. "You're the only one who can reach their hearts, remind them of what's at stake. If I stay silent, we all burn." Her eyes darkened with fierce pain and determination, a flicker of old warrior fire igniting behind the veil of exhaustion. Pushing herself upright, she moved with a grace born of countless battles hard fought, every step a quiet declaration of defiance against the looming storm. She stepped into the sun-drenched yard, voice ringing clear and fearless across the dusty plain. "I am no enemy," she called out, hands raised in solemn peace. "I fled bloodshed within my own people. This man saved my life, not for power, but for mercy." The colonists reined in their horses, dust swirling in their wake. Their leader, a rugged man weathered by harsh lands and hardened resolve, scowled, barking terse orders. The patrol slowed, weapons at the ready but not yet raised. Between them and the warriors, a fragile moment hung poised on the edge of annihilation. The Apache warriors tightened their circle, faces carved by fury and distrust. Yet they held their grip on their weapons. For now, among them, a young warrior's voice broke the silence, fierce and raw as desert lightning. "Enough words. She is ours, by law and blood. Give her to us, or this land burns." A ripple of shouts answered him from the colonists. Voices, sharp as bullets. "No more hiding. She answers to the law of the settlers here." Samuel's throat tightened. The weight of history pressed down like a stone on his chest. The walls around them, old timber, stained by years of drought and struggle, felt suddenly fragile, a thin barrier between mercy and destruction. He turned sharply to Nayeli. Their eyes met in a fierce, wordless pact, a shared burden and hope. "You are the bridge," he whispered, voice heavy with the precarious thread of possibility. "Only you can stop the fire before it consumes us all." At that instant, a sharp crack split the tension. A rifle shot peeled through the suffocating heat like a thunderclap. Hearts leapt and breaths froze. The first bullet had sounded. The ranch, once a haven of hardship and solitude, throbbed beneath the looming thunder of war. The ancient wounds of mistrust, vengeance, and desperation opened wide, bleeding into the dusty daylight. Samuel and Nayeli stood poised in the crucible of the coming battle, caught between the clashing spirits of a fierce people and the relentless law of the frontier. The war was no longer whispered on the wind. It had arrived with the harsh, bitter clarity of gunfire. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across Samuel's battered ranch, where the tension thrummed like a living heartbeat beneath the worn wooden beams. The encircling Apache warriors shifted restlessly against the dry earth, their faces unreadable yet fierce, a silent testament to the storm gathering just beyond patience. Samuel stood near the door, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders, each breath thick with unsaid fears. Inside, Nayeli's eyes met his with fierce resolve, beneath dark lashes heavy with exhaustion. Her wounds throbbed, but it was the invisible scars from betrayal within her own bloodline that haunted her gaze. She had survived battles that scarred more than flesh, fractures of loyalty and love severed by vengeance, fugitives in her own land. The ranch, once only a refuge, had become a crucible where those wounds threatened to ignite anew. The morning was broken by a sharp rustle beyond the walls. From the circle surrounding them, Tyann stepped forward, his expression a mingling of respect and urgency. "The council is divided," he began slowly, his voice carrying the weight of years lived under harsh skies. "But many see your mercy as a threat. They hunger for justice measured not in mercy's scales, but in blood." Samuel's gaze hardened. "I owe her my life once she lay bleeding at my feet. That is no crime," he said firmly. "But I understand the depth of the fires you all carry." Nayeli's voice came steady and clear, weaving between Samuel's words like a slender thread of hope. "The warriors who chase me bear old wounds that twist their sight. But there are others, those wise enough to grasp that survival needs more than hatred." She met the eyes of the nearby warriors boldly. "We face deaths from within as much as from without." A flicker of hesitation passed over a few faces, the younger warriors shifting uneasily. The council's cautious voices were drowned somewhat in the murmur as the sun burned relentlessly overhead, casting a harsh clarity on the tenuous truce. Tayan's demeanor shifted, signaling a reluctant step toward conciliation. "Words will carry to the chief. Should he hear reason, a path may yet be forged." But the radicals grow impatient. Shadows move darker in their ranks. Time is a precious thread, stretched too thin. Samuel sagged briefly, the weight of a man caught between worlds, bearing down. "Then we must hold this truce, fragile as it is. Nayeli and I will open the gates of the ranch, a sign of trust the likes of which this land has seldom seen." As he spoke, the rugged door creaked open, sunlight spilling onto the dusty floor as the ranch's threshold was physically and figuratively unsealed. Nayeli adjusted her position, the movement wincing but resolute, and stepped quietly toward the porch. Outside, the warriors responded with solemn nods or silent scrutiny. Some faces hard, some softened, as the thick haze of suspicion mingled with fragile curiosity. But peace is a brittle thing in these lands. At the edge of the horizon, a new silhouette blotted out the sun. A lone figure emerged from the wavering heat, eyes burning with hard resolve. A messenger from the radical faction, moved by fury and desperation. Across his shoulders hung a crude flag, a symbol of rebellion and ancient vengeance. Cavalry dust trailed behind him like dark smoke, and as he drew closer, Samuel's hand instinctively brushed against the worn handle of his revolver. The rider broke the tense quiet with a voice sharp as flint. "This truce is a lie. Your mercy blinds you. The council will fall under fire if you do not surrender the woman." The words spilled over the parched earth with an edge that cut through the fragile peace built with sweat and blood. Samuel's eyes narrowed, his jaw a hard line. Nayeli's hand found his briefly, a silent pact of defiance against the gathering storm. Behind them, the warriors stiffened, tension knotting like a coiled serpent ready to strike. The ranch, open and vulnerable moments before, seemed to withdraw behind walls that were barely shields against the coming fury. The air was thick with the charge of impending conflict, unspoken threats woven through the sharp glance of a rifle's gleam, the quiet tightening of leather reins, the moment before battle. And as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts of past bloodshed, the rider's ultimatum hung heavy in the air, a dark promise that the truce was over. The fragile thread of hope snapped. Outside the ranch, the radicals' banner fluttered defiantly in the wind, a signal to those who still thirsted for war that mercy was weakness and peace a forgotten word. The stage was set for reckoning, and in the heavy air, Samuel and Nayeli stood united, hearts pounding against a fate that could burn the ground beneath their feet. The next dawn would come with fire. The sun burned relentlessly over the rugged horizon, the heat shimmering off the cracked earth like a mirage. Samuel stood firm on the porch of his battered ranch, eyes fixed on the figure advancing steadily through the dust. A rider carrying a worn banner, the emblem of the radical faction fluttering angrily in the dry wind. The weight of inevitability pressed down with every creak of the leather saddle and whispered prayers lost on barren air. Beside Samuel, Nayeli drew herself up despite the ache gnawing at her wounded body. Her dark eyes, sharp and unwavering, met the approaching riders with a fierce defiance, born from years of betrayal and survival. This was no mere messenger. It was a harbinger wielding an ultimatum, one that would shatter the fragile truce painstakingly carved from distrust and blood. The rider stopped just beyond the fence, voice breaking the cloaked silence like a jagged stone tossed into still waters. "The council will not abide this foolish mercy," he spat, words edged with venom. "Surrender the woman, or we burn this place and all within it." The gathered Apache warriors tensed, fingers grazing weapons, eyes flickering between Samuel and Nayeli. Samuel's weathered hand tightened on the worn wood of the porch rail as the storm of words and threats coiled around them all. Nayeli stepped forward, pain etched into every movement, her voice steady and clear. "I am not your enemy," she declared, to friend and foe alike. "I fled bloodshed within my own people, among those who would drown us all in hate." Her gaze locked with the wild eyes pressing in confusion and fury. "This man saved my life, not for power or gain, but because he saw a soul beneath the wounds." A hush rippled through the circle as the sincerity in her voice kindled a flicker of hope. Yet the shadow of war clung tight. One of the younger warriors, fire burning in his gaze, shouted, "She is ours! Give her to us, or watch it all burn!" The colonists' leader, a grim man, hardened by years stalking treacherous land, barked back sharply, "She answers to the law of these settlements. No hiding, no mercy for fugitives." Samuel's jaw clenched. He caught Nayeli's hand, their silent pact grounding him. "Enough," he said, voice low but commanding. "This place has known loss and grief beyond reckoning, but we've also known mercy. If fire is what you seek, you'll find no honor in ash." A tense stillness fell before the distant crack of a rifle ripped through the air, a blast that sent a ripple of shock through every heart. The arrow of tension snapped. Bullets now threatened to carve their fate. Chaos ignited as warriors drew weapons and colonists raised rifles. Yet at that instant, Nayeli raised her voice, hoarse but resolute, cutting through the clamor. "Wait, this is not the way." She stepped between the warring sides, unsteady but unbroken, drawing upon a strength carved from ancient roots and hard-won will. "We have lived too long, bound by old grievances. This land does not belong to war alone." Her voice soared above the din. If we fall divided, we perish all. But if we stand together, beyond blood and bitterness, there is hope. Samuel joined her, his own voice rising with conviction. Let this ranch be more than timber and stone. Let it be a beacon, a place where peace is born from courage, where respect outlives old hatreds. A silence, fragile as desert glass, stretched between friend and foe. Slowly, Tyann, the austere emissary, stepped forward from the circle of warriors. His gaze met the restless crowd and finally rested on Samuel and Nayeli, with a weight that felt like centuries. Your words carry the truth many have forgotten, he said solemnly. It will not be easy. The radicals still plot in shadows. But today, this land sees a choice. Peace is not a gift. It is a fight, harder perhaps than war. From behind, the radicals' banner fluttered stubbornly, a last reminder that the road ahead would be lit by trials yet to come. Yet here, in the blistering light of a harsh dawn, the first step had been taken. Samuel exhaled slowly, feeling years of loneliness and loss settle into something new. A fragile hope, a possibility of belonging untarnished by fear. Nayeli's fingers squeezed his briefly, their shared gaze a quiet promise to weather the coming storms as one. Around them, the warriors lowered their weapons incrementally, the colonists easing their grips on rifles, the tension melting into wary acceptance. The ranch, once a mere refuge on the hostile frontier, became a symbol, a hallowed place where two worlds bled into one, tentative yet unyielding. As the sun climbed higher, the dry wind softened, carrying whispers of healing and the murmur of futures yet unwritten. In the dust and heat, beneath wide, indifferent skies, Samuel and Nayeli stood united, not as enemies, but as two souls fierce in their determination to forge a new path through the hard lands of old wounds. The desert around them held its breath no longer. For the first time in many seasons, it witnessed a pact born of courage, respect, and the enduring power of mercy. And in that pact, a seed was planted, a promise that even amid the bleakest of frontiers, humanity's light could still find a way to shine.